In my senior year, I got married, became pregnant, and was the first acknowledged pregnant woman to graduate from Westchester University. Others had been pregnant, but it wasn't acknowledged, you know.
I see.
And everyone was very supportive. I had a teacher that I was working with. It was like an internship. And she said, she was a single woman, and she took me aside one day and she said, you know, they sell maternity clothes. And I was like, I thought I was in incognito, you see. And she said, you should tell your husband, you know, to take you to get a new wardrobe, and which I did, which he did, you know, and everyone just adjusted to it, including the dean. It was like, And
so was it a while before you actually started teaching?
Yes, so I didn't start teaching until 1958. That was the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But I was teaching Sunday school when Margaret Odell...
So when you came here, you joined the Unitarian Church.
I was 26 years old during my first visit. My husband was 32. My two girls were 3 years old. So it was either 1957 or 58.
And it was this church.
This church, this building. So
you don't have to start over. You just started. You already just keep going. What drew you here? I'm kind of curious how you ended up coming to this church way back then.
we had friends, Reuben and Shirley Workman. They were members of this church, and they had children around the age of my daughters, and for entertainment, because we had no money to do anything, my husband was a teacher and he made less than $3,000 a year. That's how it was. But we used to say the bus drivers make more than the teachers. They would come over and we would have these political debates. It was more the men, the husbands, but we all participated. And sometimes they were debates, sometimes they were just discussions. And so during one of these dinner visits, we discussed religion and religious beliefs, what our religious beliefs are. And they stopped talking, looked at each other, and they said, "You're Unitarians." And we said, "What are Unitarians?" And they said, "Well, you just have to come to church with us, and you believe in the 7 principles and blah, 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 blah." So we did.
Isn't it fun?
And my 2 daughters, who are twins, Margaret Odell was a beautiful person, and this church had a separate building for the Sunday school.
Oh, the Austin
They
Lodge.
had
No, the big place on the hill.
Oh, the big place.
the house on the hill. And the youth lodge for the youth. I mean, oh my goodness. We were, when we walked into this church, we were saying, "Oh, what a beautiful building." And the grounds and the buildings and whatever. The ecumenical pulpit.
Oh.
When you came to church, it was like you were going to a college lecture, because the different theologians and philosophers of the day.
Who were some of the people you heard?
And I apologize, but I can only tell you two.
Okay.
Howard Thurman and Martin Luther King were two of them. And they're both African American, and maybe that's why
that's why you remember them.
I remember them, and I don't remember any of the others.
The only one I can remember as a kid was Paul Tillich.
Oh, yes.
He used to be here more than once. He was here several times.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I do, now that you say his name, see, it's the aging brain. That I remember these people, but I really, can't put a name or what the sermon was about. But they were impressive.
Yeah. So let's get started on these questions, okay? Thank you. I mean, this actually blends right in. What were the major issues in the community and the nation when you first attended USG?
In this community, it had changed suddenly from a majority white community to a majority black community. And we used to make jokes about buses coming in the night and people loading onto the buses and then disappearing. We were living on Walnut Lane, and the little streets, we were more like on a hill, and we lived, and we bought an apartment building to help us survive economically. And it had already, it was one of those big houses. East Walnut Lane. And it had already been turned into apartments. And we lived on the first floor and rented out the second and third floors. And when we moved in that block, it was a well-integrated block. And further down from Walnut Lane, like Haynes and all those little streets, they were mostly families of Italian origin. Some of them were born in Italy, the older generation. And when a woman became a widow, she dressed all in black. And we would see these ladies in the store and all dressed in black, and that's what I found out. And it was just as if the buses came in the middle of the night, that whole neighborhood just disappeared.
Wow.
Just disappeared. So nationwide, there was this great migration of black people fleeing domestic terrorism of Jim Crow. And I had terrible stories as a child in Chicago, because the people there were mostly from Mississippi, which was one of the worst environments to live in if you were African American. Globally, there were the colonies, African colonies, demanding independence.
We're here for. You have to take them. So we're here for that hour, but we just have to take breaks.
I had come up as were part of the Great Migration from the South, and you were.
And they were immigrants from the West Indies. My mother came from Jamaica, and my father came from Barbados, though he was born in Trinidad, but he was raised by his uncle in Barbados. So
And did they come straight to Chicago? Was that?
my mother had come to Philadelphia because her two sisters were here, and she came to as a domestic worker, and they were able to get her a job out in the suburbs somewhere. And my father came on a scholarship to a college that doesn't exist anymore, and I didn't write it down,
No,
and I
'cause
don't
didn't
remember
tell you I was
it.
gonna ask you.
Yes, he had been a valet for an American who worked for I've lost my words. It's what they make asphalt out of. You know, it asphalt
tar.
the asphalt lakes. They're in the West Indies. There were asphalt
Pits
lakes
or something.
Yes,
Huh.
and he needed a valet, and he somehow met my father in Barbados or Trinidad, because my father worked on a boat that went from island to island. And he said, "You have a good command of the English language, and I need a valet." He said, "Sure, I would love that job." And when he died, in his will, he left money for my father to come to Virginia to this college. He was on the board of trustees. It was a black college.
Yeah, okay.
And his wife got in contact with my father and said, he had just died, and in the will he had left money for him to get a college education, and that's how he got here.
Yeah. Interesting. All right, well, that's quite a...
Another little addition is that he wanted to become a lawyer and go back to Barbados and practice law. And they told him at the University of Illinois, no, that's not acceptable. You would have to go to an English law school. But dentistry is going to be the new thing. And if you go to dental school, you'll go back to Barbados and you'll probably be the #1 dentist there in modern dentistry. And so that's what he became.
He did,
That's
and
what
then
he
instead
did.
of going back, he stayed here.
He met my mother in Chicago. I don't. How did she get to Chicago? She became a beautician.
Okay.
And somehow a friend or something said, "Oh, come to Chicago," and
So
there are lots of jobs.
Wow. What was the racial climate here at USG when you arrived?
We looked at it as a white church. There were a few black members. There was actually a committee called the Diversity Committee that was doing outreach to the neighboring community. On the other hand, Reverend Max Dascom had visited Francina Emery and her husband because they signed the visitors list. And in talking with them, he suggested that they would be more comfortable in a black church. Big contradiction. Big contradiction.
So at the same time, there was a diversity committee reaching out to try to make the church more integrated.
Yes.
And Max Dascom. Oh my. Okay. Who were the major players?
I've been at the church so long, not constant participation,
Okay.
but when we first came, Margaret Odell recruited me to be an assistant in the church school.
Okay.
So I was just jumping in the water, and meeting lots of people. Adele and Harris Ebenbach, I remember them with love as this outreach. They did outreach to us. They invited us to their home to meet other people whom I don't remember. It was just their way, not just with us, but with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Tom and Ann Schoolmaker, and Tom's still in the choir, and I remember them. Eve Brill and her husband, they were very much into outreach. Irene and Dick Magaziner, the Lisi family, Flora and Al, I believe his name was. Flora worked at Gratz High School with my husband, and when she saw us at church, she would say, "Oh my goodness," and that started a friendship. The Lisi family. The Eberly family, Oscar and Martha Mertz, George and Mary Kidd lived around the corner, and we became very close friends with them. Also, Eversley and Francis Vaughn, both of these families were African American. And our families, because of the children, we became very close friends, not just in church, but outside of church.
Mm-hmm.
The McConkey family.
Oh,
I know there were two sisters.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking of Tom McConkey.
Tom McConkey was married to one of them.
Oh, okay.
And I don't remember the name of the other one, but they had children that
Trying to remember.
And Barbara Dowdall's family. I can't think of their name right offhand.
McDowell?
The McDowell family. I was just saying to Barbara, I remember her as a teenager. And I said, "You say you just retired from teaching? How can this be?"
What was your role in the church at that time? You said you were in the Sunday school.
Very involved in the Sunday school. Very involved. 2 different periods. The period where my daughters were participating in Sunday school, and then later when Dave Park became the minister, I was pregnant, and then my son grew up here, and I made friends, Ingrid Brown, Jane and Bob Porcello, and other people that I just can't recall their names at the time. Eula Saunders.
Oh,
Maybe
yes.
she might have been from the other era. I get the two.
Well, she was still here when I came in 1978, so it might have been later.
Just a great person.
I
Just
know.
a great person.
What has changed since you first came to USG?
During the time that Dave Park was the minister, there was great turmoil good and bad. Many black families joined this church. And I was just saying to Bernae, and she's saying to me, what happened? And I said, I don't know. I don't know what happened. But I said it might have been the turmoil that came about during that period in 1963 at the Selma March, when Reverend James Reed was attacked and murdered, and other UU ministers were also attacked by a white mob. This had a tremendous focus on race and how maybe many Unitarians say they believe in the 7 principles, but they don't have to deal with the oppression and the brutality of racism, because this separation, this apartheid system in America, you can grow up and not know any people of another race. That isn't as true today for some people, but at that time, and maybe at this time too, if you don't work with people, live with people, children go to integrated schools, well, how do you really get to know people? You only get to know them at a separate level. And a lot of the anger of some black Unitarians was spewed out in catharsis, or I don't know. I wasn't present at the 1967 GA meeting, but I did hear that it was pretty disastrous. Well, I shouldn't say disastrous. It was just it brought out the best and the worst.
You know what happened? I don't know anything about it.
I can tell you something about what happened,
Okay.
but is that when black members started disappearing again, do you think? Was after that?
I think during the there was a Black Affairs Council.
Right.
My husband, I believe, chaired the Philadelphia chapter. Richard Traylor, who was a member of Restoration Church, and others, they got the Unitarian Universalists to promise to give $250,000 a year for 4 years for grants to do anti-racism or ending racism work. And some members in this church, and I can't tell you who because I don't even remember who, they were furious. They were furious. Some
That amount had been...
that
That the
I don't
UUA had...
They had made
said
this decision.
made that decision?
Made this decision. They were furious. They were furious. And some black members were furious because they didn't want to see a Black Affairs Council, they felt everything should be together and integrated. So there was back and forth, back and forth. And again, I don't remember who felt this way or who felt that way. But, and the fact that Dave Park kept having sermons praising the Black Panthers or something that had to do with race, that didn't help. So it was a period of turmoil.
Yeah.
And was that why many Black members left? I don't know. I can't say
Well,
for
then
a fact.
the money didn't exist. That was the other piece. The money that the UUA promised them didn't exist.
Okay,
So nobody
you're
got any money. So that was the other piece.
But they did get some money because there were grants made.
Okay.
There were some grants made. One grant went to a recycling program which hired homeless men to bring in plastic and papers and do the recycling that the city does now and get paid for it, you know, and it was organized. and Dick Traylor set up that program. I remember asking Dick Traylor for a grant for a group at Linkelbach that wanted to go to Harrisburg to lobby for funds for education. Now, I only know about those two grants, but you know, how much money or whatever happened. That, the facts of it, that never really, I really didn't know about that.
Right. Coming forward all the way, you know,
Right.
the distance between that time around 67 that we're talking about, all the way till now, what's changed at USG in that time period?
In the mid-70s, I went through personal traumatic experiences, separation and divorce, my daughter becoming mentally ill and having to leave her job, and going back to teaching. And I just stopped coming to the church. It had nothing to do with the church. It had to do with me,
Yeah.
in my personal life. I had close friendships with Ingrid Brown and her family and other families, and those friendships more or less ended because we weren't a family again. They were very good friends with my husband and I, so it made it like uncomfortable.
I see. Yeah.
To
How about now? What do you see as changes that have here at USG?
well, off and on. In the 90s, when Nina Gray was the minister, I came back and was very involved in social action. The 80s, I would come to church, but I really mentally and physically wasn't participating.
Mm-hmm.
But when Nina Gray became the minister, I became very active again on the social action committee.
Mm-hmm.
The Lingelbach tutoring program, the Lingelbach dinners.
Is that when they started up?
Yes, yes. And I was a teacher at Lingelbach
Okay.
before that. at that time, I was not. I was teaching at Solace Cohen in the Northeast. But I had been in the 70s a teacher at Lingelbach, so I still had those connections.
Right.
The peace movement, we were involved, in the peace movement at two different times. We used to go out with signs on Lincoln Drive in front of the church, protesting
Vietnam? Or?
The Vietnam, but that's not what's in my mind. Vietnam, I remember getting on a couple buses going to New York City and joining 1 million people in the Vietnam War.
I was there too.
Were you there?
I was there.
You were one of the million?
Yeah.
I know we had a lot of buses.
Yeah, a lot.
But then when the occupation and invasion of Iraq, we were out in front again.
Yeah.
And that certainly was part of the social action work. So in the 90s, I was in the beginning of 2000s. I remember coming to meetings when they were looking for a new minister, and Kent Mathias was interviewed, and there were discussions and all. And I think he's been a wonderful fit because of all the young people. When I come to the church, I don't feel a part of the church because all the people I was close to, most of them, are gone. And there are all these new young people, which I think is just beautiful. But this has led me to believe that I still need to be coming to the church. I read the bulletin every month and I say, I'm going to take this class, or I'm going to do this. The Death Cafe, I miss that, but I really, if they have that again, I really want to go to that. Mindful meditation, because I lead kind of a stressful life. Mm-hmm. But the church is doing important work.
Okay.
I don't know why more African American families have not joined. Maybe there needs to be more outreach and publicity of what Unitarian Universalism is, because the majority of black children don't go to any church. That's what I know from being a teacher. There is this lack of spiritual community, because that's what a church is. Mm-hmm. And I know someone said to me, I'm not really a member of this church. I said, because I'm an atheist. And I said to her, you're a part of the church community. And that's part of a church too. And we agree that if you want to be an atheist, you can be an atheist. So she felt comforted with that.
You've talked some about this already, but I wanted to be sure that you'd included everything you wanted to about how have you evolved over the years since you started coming to church.
Spiritual development, being in this environment, testing what you think you believe, that I've certainly become more inclusive and appreciative of my Black heritage religion and not putting it down, but having an appreciation for it and knowing that it helped so many Black people survive. Even though I went to a family dinner and in a joking way they said, you'll sit with the agnostics and the atheists over at this table. It was kind of like an insult, but it was funny and we did all laugh. But I just said, oh, is that what you think of me?
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Oh, you know Unitarians are not Christians. But when Kent said at a service, he asked anyone who believed they were a Christian to stand up, and up I stood, and there were only 2 other people standing. And then at coffee hour, they were saying, well, you don't really mean that you're a Christian because do you believe you have to be saved? And then I said, no, don't worry. No, when I stood up, I wasn't thinking about that.
Right. Right.
A previous person that we talked to said that one reason she thought that African Americans didn't come here was because they saw church as having hymns, and it was more of a church experience, which she didn't see getting here. She saw that as a difference. Why the typical Black family might go to church on Sunday, and that was their church day. It wasn't the rest of the week, so to speak. But do you think that's do you think that has anything to do with it, that we don't have a church experience, we have a thoughtful, intellectual experience?
I think we do have a church experience. I feel the ritual part, it's just maybe different from other churches, but we definitely do have a routine and pass the peace. I remember the first time I came to pass the peace, I was, oh, this is new. And taking the polished stones and that sort of thing. I mean, all of that is new to me. It's not the way it used to be. When we first came here, I said, these hymns are the same as the Episcopalian hymns. They've just changed the words. Yes. Onward Christian soldiers, they just changed the words, but I know that hymn. I think that, I just think it's outreach, and I think it's that culture has changed so much. Mm-hmm. I don't feel comfortable with the youth Black culture. I hate the rappers, not all, but turn that off. Just don't. Yeah. I'm not comfortable at all. I remember as a child, after leaving Sunday school, we would go to the Baptist church and sit in the balcony, not out of making fun, but out of awe that some people were touched with the Spirit, and they would sometimes cry, or we were in awe of that and wondered if someday we would be touched by the Spirit. And I remember at a union meeting, the PFT meeting, when we were going through a tumultuous era, of raising my hand and saying something and not knowing where it came from. And I think that was some kind of spiritual experience.
Right. Yeah. Looking forward, what changes would you propose or recommend for USG?
Until I start to participate again, I don't think I know, because I'm not
said something about
participating.
More outreach into the Black community in terms of letting them know what Unitarianism is
when
about.
you hang that banner that says Black Lives Matter, then you have to show it with your individual and collective action. And I want to go to every Black church and say the same thing. Yes, you say this. So it's not just the Unitarian Church. I want to say it to all churches. If Black lives matter, then why is there so much hopelessness in our schools, in our neighborhoods? Why is there gang warfare? Why do young Black males think that being a drug seller is an occupation? These are depressing thoughts that I have. I just feel Philadelphia, all of Philadelphia, all the citizens are not dealing with the truth. We're resisting the truth that we see every day.
Right. Thinking of the UU's 7 principles, what has your involvement in USG meant to you in terms of the principles?
The principles were the reason I came, because they were already my principles. Why? I don't know. Some of them were from my family, and some of them were just things I thought about. From developing as a human being. I always was a humanist. I remember as a little child, my mother had a belt. She called it Dr. Do-Good. And so if I didn't obey or did something mischievous, she would say, "Go get Dr. Do-Good." And I remember being 4 or 5 saying, why does she do this? This is so demeaning. I mean, as a little child, I just said, oh, there must be a better way, than hitting your children.
Yeah. What are the changes that you see needing to happen, particularly with the Ending Racism Committee? What do you think the work there should be, or the emphasis?
You're talking about the Ending Racism.
Ending Racism. Because
I was on that committee.
Right.
I was on that committee.
What do you think we ought to be doing in that committee? What changes do you think we ought to make?
Working with other religious congregations to confront what's happened to our schools, and doing this on a statewide basis, because I am sure if we reached out to rural communities throughout Pennsylvania that think badly of Philadelphia, that if we could do some outreach, we could get rid of some of these legislatures that either are hateful people or ignorant people. A mixture of both. It's pretty clear from their decisions, just in that budget that they just passed, that they're people haters.
Right.
So I think if we would just stop resisting change and say we want to be part of the change. No, we can't do it by ourselves. But can we, reach out to other congregations and face what is happening to our schools, to our people? I know we can. I know we can, because I love the 7 principles.